Hi guys, meet me again, Cindy Himawan. So today's our topic is about how to use the technology or computer to help us to do the audit, or we call it with the computer assisted audit techniques, or in short we call with the CAAT. Let's start it. So before we start with the definition of what is CAAT, let's start with the reviewing what is audit technique. So the audit techniques is talking about the tools, the methods or processes by means of which an auditor will collecting necessary evidence to support the opinions in respect of the proposition or assertion submitted by the client to him for his examination. So in here it means that in the audit techniques we have what we call with the tools, methods and process. So there is something action, and the action is used to collecting the evidence, and then by using that evidence then we can the auditor can do the assertion. So it's like doing the analysis whether about the evidence that they found. So it's mean that the CAAT, it's the techniques to use the audit using the computer. Okay, so it means that the audit techniques, so if it's previously done manually, but now using the CAAT will use a computer to automate the audit process or the audit technique itself. Usually the CAAT will includes about the basic office productivity. It can use spreadsheet, word processes and other editing programs, and also there are several software that can be used in order us to use the CAAT. And basically the CAAT will be used for doing the statistical analysis and business intelligence also. Okay, so it means that of course the CAAT only can be used if the company already using IT when they do the processing data. Yeah, so it's mean if the company still using the manual activity, example using paper, or if let's say they use Excel, it means that the CAAT cannot be used in that kind of company. Okay, and then why we need the CAAT? So the CAAT use is first is because nowadays we have the increasing use in the information technology inside the company, right? So it's mean most of the company nowadays already use IT in order to do their transaction, and it means that uh, it's also actually related to the complex of the business process. The more complex the business process, it's mean that the company also will have the complex information, and then the complex business process, and by using the information technology, it means that the data also increasing in terms of the number. It means that the number of the data is higher, and it's also related to the it's possible that when the data increasing, it's mean that there is a possibility that we have the hidden data or transaction. So that's why the CAAT will use to reveal whether they have like the hidden data or transaction, or like the unusual information. And then by using the information technology also, nowadays the company already having the integrated data, whether it is in the internal side, which is the data is actually already shared between a lot of functional department. So example, like when we talk about the material master data, so it's not only belong to the inventory department, but the material master also can be used by the other functional area like the sales, purchasing, and the other things. So it's mean that the data is actually not only belong to one person, but it's already shared among many person. And the data also can be shared in the external party. Example, like we have the agreement with the transportation courier, we have the agreement with the bank. So it's mean that our data also can be shared with the external party. So it's mean that we have the urgency to know that this data, who is access this data, who is changes this data, right? So we have that because currently the data is shared with many person. So it's mean that we need to know who has the access to that transaction, who does the transaction changes, or sometimes we call it with the audit trail. So we need to know what is the changes for each data, who do it, when, and what is the changes, and so on. So we need to trace it. And then and among the, because of the business competition, that nowadays the audit is not only used to finding the mistake, but we need to have the prevention. So the audit is not only talking about what is the wrong, okay, but in the audit we trying to prevent the mistake happen. So that's why we need to know what is the unusual data, what is the unusual transaction. So how to do it? Of course, we need the technology to help us to reveal what is the unusual data. Okay, and then by increasing the data and the information, it means that the auditor also need to evaluate or the auditor need to do the auditing, or in here we call it with the evaluation, in efficient and effective manner. Efficient in effective manner here means that the auditor need to do more work, because more data, more things to be evaluate. So it's mean the auditor need to do more work, and then need to be done in less time. It's mean the auditor need to be faster, and then the auditor also need to give more value. It's mean like rather than just finding a mistake, but if it's possible, then the auditor also needs to do the prevention, like I said before. Okay, so it's mean that the assurance process or the auditing process need to be more robust and comprehensive. The robust here talking about the information that the auditor collected need to be more accurate, more fast, and also a comprehensive means that the information is not only captured only in one area, one small area, but the information need to be captured in the whole company. Okay, and when we talk about the company already integrated internally and also externally with the many party, it means that the auditor need to collecting the data comprehensive, means that the data need to be collected end to end, and also related to the data that needed by the external party. And then the next thing, why we need the CAAT also, because the CAAT tools could help the auditor to do the examination with more rapid. It's mean more fast, more accurate, and it's possible to examine the large amount of data, the data a lot. The data have not only internal but also externally. And then the CAAT possibility to put the new opportunity, this is actually related to what I said before, is doing the prevention. We know we can reveal what is the hidden transaction, what is the hidden data, what is the unusual transaction that maybe it's not yet mistake, but then we can prevent it before the mistake happen. Okay, and then the CAAT tools also can help us to provide what is the information needed in order to fulfill our audit objective. So in the beginning, we already have what we call with the audit charter. Okay, whereby in the audit charter we already define what is the objective, and then we already define what is the evidence we need. If you remember, we already defined this also during a few weeks back when we talk about the evidence. So actually the CAAT tools actually can help us to provide this evidence more accurate and more specific. So how the CAAT will help the audit process? There are several usage that CAAT will help. The first is to do the computation and recalculation. Computation here means that when we have the application software, so it's mean we will check again whether the software is already processed correctly related to the computation and the calculation. So using the CAAT, actually the tools can help us to recalculate again whether, so it's like checking the consistency. Yeah, so if you still remember, when we define the software, we have the business process requirement, right? In that requirement, we already define what is the computation and the calculation. So that's why later on we can put the logic in the CAAT tools, and later on the CAAT tools will help us to recalculate again whether the current calculation is already the same like what we need in the with what we already defined in the business process requirement. Okay, so the computation and the recalculation tools will help us to re-performing again. So the system will recalculate their weight, so and then checking whether the result is already correct or not. So the example here is example about the tax calculation. So the CAAT tools will help us, so we can put the logic of the tax calculation, and then the CAAT tools will show us whether the result that processed in the current application and our CAAT tools is already the same or not. If not the same, then we can revisit again whether is there something wrong when we do the application implementation. So if you still remember, so actually the computation and recalculation here is actually related to the input and the processing control. If you still remember, a few weeks back we also already learned about the control that we can do, right, in order to do our audit process. So we have like the general control, and then we also have the computer control. So in order to do the input and processing control, so we can do the CAAT to help us to do this recalculation. And then the second one is actually about the reperformance. So the reperformance here is actually so the CAAT tools will use to reperform again, okay, but actually the same like the first computation, but in the computation and the calculation, the main point is about the calculation or about the processing. Okay, so checking about the more on the calculation or the formula or in the algorithm. But in the reperformance, the focus is actually more on the output control. So like we want to know like whether the software already can, what is the report show, what is the output that resulted by the application, whether is it already the same like what we define or not. Okay, so basically computation, recalculation, and the reperformance is the same things like doing the checking again, doing the validation whether the result in the system already same like what we already defined in the business process requirement, but the differentiate is in the computation we are focusing on the calculation or the formula and on how the system process it. And then in the reperformance, our focus is about the output control like the report, the printing, the dashboard, and so on. Okay, and then the CAAT tool also can help us to do the analytical procedure, and usually it's called as GAS, Generalized Audit System. So what the CAAT tools do is actually it will extract the data and then do the analyzing, and the analyzing can be it can be depend on what the audit objective, like example whether they want to check about the financial things, whether the report already correct or not. Okay, so basically the analytical procedure will extracting first and then do some query using the data that already extracted. So the difference between the previous tools, in the previous tools, the tools will help us to reperforming again, like doing simulation again. But in the analytical procedure, the tools will extract the data first. So the data will be extracted and then it will be analyzed. The analyze is the same like when we do the query. And okay, so the most common tools that used in the analytical procedure is audit command language, or in short we call it the ACL. And the ACL will be look like this. So we can extract the data something like this, and then they in for each data, then we can do like the comment things like this. We can put like what we want to know, what we want to analyze, like example whether we want to see the unusual data, example like we can do like query things like what is the average transaction, and then whether we found any unusual value of transaction. If example the average of our transaction is, let's say, 100,000, but then suddenly there is a transaction that maybe only 10,000, or maybe it's more than like 1 million. So it's mean there is some unusual transaction, so we can do some query in the ACL, and then after that we can find out what is the unusual transaction on something. So the analytical procedure can be variative, so it's depend on what you in what the company needs to achieve during the auditing. And then we also have the snapshot. The snapshot is actually, it's calling like it's defined as a digital pictures of procedures of the console. It means that, for each step of the data processing, uh, we will do the snapshot. We will do like taking a picture. So if there is an input like this, and then it will be processed like this, and then it will having an output like this. Okay, something like that. So this is like the snapshot. Okay, so for each data processing we will have like this picture of this status, and then after this procedure will help us as a reference for subsequent output. So example, in the future, if we have this similar data, and so the output example, if we already snapshot that the the input is A, and then the output will be A1. So later on, if we have the similar transaction, example, if we have same data A, and then the output should be also A1. So the snapshot is help us to comparing uh, the procedure between the what is supposed to be, and so we already defined this is the correct procedure, and then in the next time if we have another transaction, then we will compare it with the procedure that we already defined before. Okay, so that's what we call with the snapshot. And please don't imagine that snapshot is like a taking picture, yeah, but even though it's saying like a taking picture, but actually system will like recording, yeah, so it will recording the data input, the processing, and then the output. Okay, so uh, the result is not a picture or image, okay, but the result is actually also what is the data, what is the process, and what is the input, what is the output. So later on when they have another transaction, then it will compare with the previous snapshot. Okay, so even so don't be confused that it's not a real image, yeah, a real picture, but it's like picturing or screenshot the data in the system. Okay, and then next we will have what we call with the integrated test facility. So it's mean that we will create like a dummy entities into the production software. Okay, so we will create like example the dummy customer account, we will create like a dummy item or product, and then we will testing it directly in the production. By right, the testing or the auditing should be done in another server, right? I ever explained to you that usually we will have separate server, like there is a testing server, there is a development server, and there is a production server. So in the ITF, actually instead of using the testing server or audit server, we directly go to the production server, but we put the dummy transaction there, and then we run it. Okay, because sometimes in the testing server, the environment can be different. Sometimes we cannot really uh, take the similar transaction in the testing area. So that's example, when we have the integration with the bank or with the courier, of course we cannot test it in the testing server, right? Because in the testing server usually they will not have a connection again with the bank, because it's just a testing environment, but the real connection will be exist in the production. So that's why when we want to test something, sometimes we need to go to the we need to go to the production server and then do the testing. But the things is, when we do that testing, so that the dummy entities and that dummy transaction should not be logged or should not be reported in the financial report and other official report. Example, we do the sales transaction, dummy sales transaction. So the ITF tools helping us, even though we do the dummy transaction in the production software, but it's like the ITF tools is doing like a flag. Okay, so it like it help us, so we possible to say, to differentiate which data is dummy, and then after that this data and transaction will not be reported in the official report. Okay, so later on when we publish the report to tax ministry, or we publish the report in the investor reporting, we will not see this dummy transaction. So that is possible because help of the from the ITF tools. So the ITF tools helping us to do the testing in the production software, but will not, the dummy transaction will not appear in the official report. Okay, and then the next we will have the embedded audit facilities. So it's similar like the ITF, but in the ITF we only create the dummy entities, and dummy entities means the dummy master data and dummy transaction. But in the embedded audit facilities we will insert program. Okay, so we will insert the application program. So it's like the procedure to checking our, so we having like an algorithm that we insert into our current software, and then the code is actually can be variety. Yeah, it will depend on what we want to refill. So we can check like the same things, like we can check which one is the unusual data, unusual transaction, whether maybe the user trying to delete, or maybe the user trying to change something. So we can put some program to spying the current application. Okay, and of course before we do this we need to have the permit from the company, because we need to make sure that the authority or the owner knows about this kind of inserted program, because if not, then it consider like we are doing hijack, yeah, or we are doing the virus. So it's mean that we need to make sure that the authorized person is know about this. But even, or maybe, of course maybe not everyone will know, because if everyone know, then we will not be able to caught the person, yeah. But it means that still we need to inform the authorized person to make sure that our program is not considered as a virus or interrupted program. And then we also will have what we call with the system activity file integration. And so this is actually related to, like, okay, usually in some software, okay, like ERP software, they already have like in the ERP usually we have like the audit trail. Okay, or maybe another software also usually they already have like the activity file. Okay, so this activity file is showing what is the changes data, who done the changes, when they change, and what is the changes data, and so on. So this activity file actually also considered as a CAAT, even though after the activity file, even though we still need to extract again and then do the analysis, yeah, but it can be considered as CAAT tools also actually. Okay, so in the most computer operating system nowadays, we already have the producing a log. Okay, so like who installed this, who changed this, who access, when access, using what IP address, when, and so on and so on. So that's what we call with the log, yeah. So later on, this log can be used as our audit process, audit evidence. Okay, so these are the several CAAT software that already usually used by the audit company. We have like from the Anderson and Co, Deloitte, Coopers, Ernst and Young, and so usually they will have for each company, each audit company, usually they already have the CAAT software that usually they use. But the common one is the ACL, the audit command language. So it's the free sorry, it's not owned by the auditing company, so usually we can use any company can use for this ACL software. And then we also have CAAT that usually used in the testing. Okay, so when we do the testing during the whether during the implementation project, okay, usually we also have the testing tools. So these testing tools actually also can be considered as CAAT tools, because when we can define something wrong during the testing phase, it can be used as our consideration during the audit. Okay, example, if we know that there is a bug that not yet solved during the implementation phase, it means this bug can lead into big mistake later after the software use, right? So by looking into these testing tools, then the auditor also can get some information about the software, yeah, whether the software already implemented properly or not, whether the testing already done according to the testing scenario or not. So the testing tools usually the testing tools is the automate in software testing. So instead of doing the testing one by one, so we can automate it. Okay, so but it's not for just all software, but usually the testing tools will be used if the testing need to be run many times. So rather than doing testing one by one again, so we can automate it. And then if it's expensive to perform manually, example, if we want to test like the stress test is mean like the performance load, yeah. So example, instead of collecting like 1,000 person to check, so we want to know whether our server still can handle 1,000 person if they log in into our server at the same time. So of course it will be expensive for us to collecting 1000%. Maybe in the beginning still okay, but can you imagine if every time we doing the testing then we need to collecting 1000 and 1000%, so it will be expensive. So rather than doing it manually, so we can we can use the testing tools, we can use the software to automate it. And then maybe the software also difficult to perform manually. Example, if we have the integrated process with the bank or with the other party, which is it's impossible, or maybe it will be difficult for us to perform it, so we can do it also using the automation tools. So remember that the testing tools is not suitable if the test is only run sometimes or only once in a blue moon. So if the test is not run often or the test is not important, maybe we just testing like the login. Okay, maybe we for the login maybe we don't need to, if it's just a normal login, okay, maybe we don't need to do the testing automated, yeah. But if example, even though it's only login, but it will need integrated process, or it will need a lot of people to try login at the same time, so it means it's also okay to use the testing tools. Okay, so sometimes we cannot judge the testing important or not based on the process. Example, whether the login process and the checkout transaction payment is, which one is more important. Of course, if we look only in the process, we can say that checkout payment is more important than the login, yeah. But you know, when sometimes we cannot say that also if we are talking about the banking system. Okay, if we are talking about the banking system, of course the login also very important, so that's why we cannot just directly see whether the test needed or not just looking into the process, but we need to come back again to the risk. Okay, so the important or not here is related to the risk. Okay, the higher the risk, of course we need to automate it. Okay, and then if the test is related to the usability, it means like more in the UI or UX, better we do it manually instead of using the testing tools, yeah. So example, if you want to check whether the color is already nice, whether the button place is already consistent or not, so more on the UI UX, so better we check manually instead of using the testing tools. So basically the testing tools will look like this. So we will put the we still do the testing scenario, okay, like what you already learned during the ERP or during the implementation testing. You need to create the testing scenario, you need to put what is the input, the processing and the output, something like the snapshot that we already discussed before. We put that into the Excel file, and then we put into the system, and then the system will check based on this snapshot, based on the scenario plan that we already done. Basically it's as simple as that, what we call with the testing tools. And so there are a lot of testing tools type, and I'm not going to explain this one by one because I assume you already learned this when you learn about the implementation and testing. So basically I just review it again, that we have several testing tools type, like on the beginning we have what we call with the task management tools, where we can like manage, we can input the testing scenario, we can input the date, we know whether the testing already done or not, we can prioritize which testing that should go first and so on. So it's more on the managing the testing testing activity. And then in the left side we have what we call with the requirement testing to, so the tools is help us to check whether the requirement is already complete or not. And then in the test design and the test data preparation is actually used to prepare. So example, based on the requirement, so what kind of test that we need to do, what kind of data that we need to prepare, so this is the tools that we can use. And then we also can have the static analysis tools. If you remember, in the testing we have white box testing and black box testing, right? The black box testing is more on the requirement, and the white box is more on the coding. So it's really like checking, is there any unused variable, is there any unused class, unused object, or is there any if then statement without else, if there any what wrong defined parameter and so on. So it's really checking the code line by line. So instead of doing it manually, we can use the static analysis tools, so whereby we can run and the system and the tools will help us to identify the wrong of the code. And then there is also tools to help us to calculate or to measure the performance, like the stressing test that I like just now I told you before in the example, like we want to know whether our server can handle many person login at the same time or not. And like similar like when we do the load test, okay, if we want to know what is our speed test, if what is our speed test in the Wi-Fi, so similar like that, we can call it as a performance measurement. So we want to know like what is our current server memory usage, what is our current loading process and so on. So it's similar like our device manager. And then we also can have the test running comparison. So example, we already done the integration testing, then we done the system testing, then we can do the comparison whether the test in the integration testing and the system testing is already the same or not. So instead of checking manually, so we can do the comparison. And then in the integration test also, we if you still remember, in the integration testing we need harness and drivers to help us, because maybe some of the process or some of the algorithm is not there. So that's why we need to have harness and driver to make us possible to do the integration process. And then we can do the debug tools also, so the system will help us to check which line or which algorithm make the program stop and so on. And then we can do the coverage measures, like whether the requirement already fulfilled or not. Like example, if we have 3 type of data, numeric, alphanumeric, and image, okay, so we want to know whether all the data needed is already covered or not. So it will be done in the covered measure. And then in the dynamic analysis, if you still remember, we have a lot of type, right? Like we want to see like we can use the decision tree, we can use like the like sorry, I forget, like boundary evaluation boundary. And then we have like the branch decision, we have like the statement coverage areas. Okay, so we have a lot of dynamic testing, right? So the testing tools also can help us to automate this process. So instead of doing manually, like doing the calculation manually, so we can use the testing tools here. And then so how to implement the CAAT? So the first, we need to know, we need to define what is the accessibility and the availability of our IS facility and software and so on. So we need to know like whether our software already have this kind of data. So that's why in the few weeks back when I asked you about the evidence, we need to know whether this evidence can be provided by the software or not. If it can be, so we need to know what kind of information that already in the system. And then we need to know also whether our system already have the what we call just now is with the log file, system log file or system activity file. It means that if our system already have that log file, it means that we can use it to help our auditing, right? So that's why we need to check first whether the system, our current system, already have it or not. So make sure we will not have a double tools. And then we need to set the audit objective. Okay, so what we want to do with our CAAT tools. So in the previous slide, I already explained like what how CAAT can help us. So whether we want to use it as a recalculation, or we want to use it as a snapshot, or we want to use it as a integrated ITF, or maybe we need help in the testing tools. So we need to define what is our objective for our CAAT tools, and then we need to define what is our output requirement. So after we define the objective and then we define what is the output, we need to understand what will be the input in our CAAT tools, and then what will be the output. We need to understand about the type, about the format, about the layout, and so on. And then we also need to know about the procedures, how we going to collecting the data. Is it directly doing the simulation in the system, or whether we want to extract first and then we do the analyzing. So it depend, that's why it will be depend on what CAAT tools that you want to use, and then you need to define the procedures. Okay, and then define the resource requirements, like example what you need to have, like do you need admin, do you need the personnel, do you need the programmer, do you need the server example, or do you need the hardware or anything, what kind of resources that you need. And then after that you need to get the access, you need to get the permission to access that resources. Okay, and then what we need to consider when we want to use the CAAT, the first one, we need to make sure that the CAAT is easy to use, and also it can extract the data properly. So in terms of easy to use, it means that we need to know what is our technical and expertise knowledge. Okay, whether do we need to do the coding. So as an auditor, we need to check if I cannot do the coding, so who can help me. Okay, so what is the technical and the expertise used in order us to implement some CAAT tools. And then in terms of the data extraction, then we need to think about if we need to have simplified query. Okay, so if it's possible, then the query is not like the query when we do the programming, right? But the query is more on the human, using the human language, yeah, instead of using the programming language. Example, the query can use like the simple like filter. Okay, so instead of typing the SQL, so we can do the filter like you just click the data and click by click by click. Okay, so it's talking about the simplified. And then we also need to check about the compatible of the standard audit program. So we need to know what is the characteristic, or what is the expectation of our client. Yeah, so what is their standard program? Like example, if they don't want to use the example, if they don't want to use if they don't want to us to put some program, spying program in their server, then don't do it. Okay, if example they prefer to have the extracting data first and then we do the analyze, then following the rules. Okay, so we need to follow what is the standard of the program in the company, one company, because one company and the other company can be different. One company may be okay with we put the spying program, but maybe one company is not uh, is not uh, is not is don't want to do that. So it means we need to find another CAAT tools. And then okay, so we're talking about the CAAT tools need to accommodate the company different needs. It means actually it related to the if the company integrated to external party, so it means that the data can have or can be extracted from many different platforms. Example, it can be extracted from the website, can be extracted from the bank, from the courier, and so many things. So it means that we need to make sure that our CAAT tools can work not only in Windows. Maybe it need to be run in Linux or in Android and so on. And then how about the format, for different format? Because maybe if we run in the Windows, we can get the CSV file, but if we run in the example, if we run in the Linux, maybe the format of the data will be different again. Yeah, so we need to make sure that our CAAT tools also can handle several format data. Okay, it's also related to the standard format here. If talking about the example, if we want to check about the currency, so how many decimal that we are talking about, and then if example we need to do the auditing in many countries, so the decimal in in each country could be different. And maybe we're talking about the format of the tax number. The tax number in Indonesia and in Singapore and in US also it's different length. So that's why we need to know what is the different needs of data in our company related to the integrated process, yeah, whether it's in the internal or also in the external side. And then we need to check again about the cost effectiveness. Remember that we want to use the CAAT because we want to make our work faster, effective, okay, but we need to know what will be included in the implementation cost of the CAAT. If the CAAT tools is expensive, okay, and then we need to training again, we need to have the specific environment, and which is it's very expensive, then we need to reconsider it, okay, because remember that the CAAT tools is like a supplementary, it's meant to help us, it's not the main focus of the audit, okay. So we need to be careful, don't let the CAAT tools uh, become another burden for our auditing process. We need to remember also about the time constraint, okay. Remember again that the CAAT tools is meant to help us, it's meant to help the audit process can be faster. So if the CAAT tools implementation is take longer than the auditing process, so we need to reconsider again, yeah. Please check again how long we need to implement the CAAT tools, and then check again about actually it related to the system activity file that already in the system, in the current system, yeah. So if in the current system they already have the audit trail, if they have like the log activity file on or similar with that, then check again, maybe we can use it instead of build from scratch. So how we can emphasize it, emphasize what we already have. And then we also need to check again with the level of audit risk, okay. If example our audit purpose is not so high, the risk is not high, so we need to compare again with the cost of the error. Example, if the cost of error, example, if we're not doing any audit, if we're not doing any preventive things, what is the cost of error? If it's still cheaper than the audit, the CAAT tools implementation cost, then why we need to do it, okay. So we need to make sure that the cost of error happen. So if the error happen and we're not find it using the CAAT tools, then the cost is very expensive, then okay, we can consider to build the CAAT tools because we need to prevent so the error will not happen, so the company will not get lost. Okay, so these are the several considerations that we need to think before we use the CAAT. Okay, and then we also need to check about the stability of the application software. Example, if the software is frequently changed, so it means that the CAAT tools also need to be changed, right? So is it possible? So if the software is keep changing, in terms of the version or in terms of the environment, like example the format data or the user data is changes many times, so maybe we cannot use the CAAT tools because the CAAT tools is meant to use for the stable or the mature software, yeah? It means that the software need to be not changes for many times, because usually when the software changes, then the CAAT tools also need to be changed, so it will be very troublesome. Okay, so that's the consideration of the CAAT use, and so that is for today's topic about the CAAT tools. So let me know if you still have any question. Thank you.